Hi everybody, welcome to Jacey's Creek. My name's Emily. Today we are doing Season 2, Episode 17. We are so close to the end, guys. It's weird. This came out ordinarily on March 10th, 1999. So that was a long time ago. But today, that's the episode that we are doing. And if you have not already, make sure to follow my Instagram. That's Pacey, that's Witter and Potter, and make sure to follow my TikTok. That's Pacey and Joey, and make sure you subscribe to all the platforms, including my YouTube channel. That's Jacey's Creek Podcast. And without further ado, let's get into this thing. The first scene that we have is scene 1 of Joey, and she is laying on Dawson's bed on her stomach with tears in her eyes, because this is a dream. This is Dawson's dream. So we're gonna see like how he probably feels about Joey and Jack and everyone else, and it will show in this, because last time what we saw was Dawson drunk telling everyone what he thought about everyone. So that was last episode, and so this episode we kind of see how Dawson feels about Jack and Joey. So Dawson says, well, and Joey says, well, and she sighs, and she goes, I don't think I can find the words. And Dawson says, I mean, keep in mind that it's a rough cut and everything. Just trust me and be honest. Just tell me and be honest. And Joey says, in my entire life, I have never seen unequivocal move by words and moving images on the screen. I mean, this type of movie is going to experience that not only enlightens and inspires, but can changes the way people look at life, their world, and their universe. And Dawson says, God, Joey, you have no idea how much that means to me, especially coming from you. And Joey says, well, there's no doubt about it. And she goes, Jack McPhee will be one of the greatest filmmakers of our generations. I mean, think about it, Dawson. We knew him when, and she gets up from the bed, and Dawson's confused, like, what in the world is happening? And he goes, Joey, wait a minute, I've directed this movie. And Joey said, Shakespeare, Conaz, Senior, Burden, McPhee. And Dawson says, Joey, what are you talking about? You were there, I directed it, look. And he takes out the VCR, and it says Creek Days, a film by Jack McPhee. And Jack enters the window, and you can tell that this is a dream, because Joey and Jack would never call each other honey. And Joey says, honey, there's only one word to describe you, brilliant. And Jack laughs, and Joey says, no, genius. And Jack says, again, he would never say honey, but that's what Dawson's dream. You know, like how you have like those weird dreams and you're like, what in the world did I just dream about? And that's probably what Dawson's having. And Jack says, honey, you will not believe what happened. I ran into Stephen Shakespeare in the cafeteria. He offered me a job. I'm going to Hollywood, which, okay, you can totally tell this is Dawson's dream. And Joey and Jack start kissing, and Dawson's just standing there, really, really confused. And they stop, and Jack gets on one knee, and he asks me if Joey will marry him. And Dawson looks confused, while Joey looks completely amazed. And Joey says, yes. And Jack gets up, and Joey's like, what? And Dawson's like, what? You're gay. And Jack goes, my favorite line, I guess not. Oh gosh. And Jack says, let's go. We'll send you a postcard from Dawson. And Dawson says, Joey, what about us? And she follows Jack out the window. And Joey says, it's a showbiz, Dawson. And Dawson says, Joey. And Joey gets over, and she says, get over it, Dawson. You're not my type. You never were. Which I don't feel like Joey would ever really say it like that to Dawson. And Jack and Joey are gone, and we see Dawson wake up. And he's like, no! Again, I feel like this is one of those dreams like you have that just like completely makes it feel real. I had a dream like that a couple, like a week ago maybe, And it's been really, like, I've been thinking about it a lot. Like, it's one of those dreams where I had a bird, and I was supposed to take care of this bird, and this bird was dying, and it was just a weird dream. And I woke up, and I was like, do I have a bird? But it didn't help because my window, like, you can hear all the birds going, tweet, 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 and I was like, oh my gosh, I killed my bird. So, that's probably how Dawson felt when he woke up. He was like, oh my gosh, Joey's married Jack. The next scene that we have is scene 2 of Joey. So then this is real life, not Dawson's dream. And it cuts to Joey sitting at a table, drinking a Dr. Diet Coke in the lunchroom. And she's checking out guys in the lunchroom, and Jack is next to her. And she's like, loser, pedophile, serial killer, airhead. Okay, Jack, it's your turn to rate the guys in the lunchroom. And if you have not already seen Gilmore Girls, you guys know that I've talked about this show several times. But there was this game that Rory and Lorelai played. And I'm not going to, like, spoil the whole show, but this is a big part of the show, too. Where they would play 1, 2, 3. So obviously Rory's dad's not in her life, but Luke is, and they're at Luke's, and they were playing 1, 2, 3. So they're like 1, and then they go 2, and then the third one was Luke, and he walks over, and he's like, what are you guys doing? And she's like, what, Daddy? And then Kirk came over, who is like this weird guy in the show, and Rory's like, and Lauren's like, okay, let's not include Luke as number 3, but we're gonna include the next one that comes by, and the next person that comes by is Kirk, and Rory goes, Daddy? And that's one of my favorite scenes, and that's what it reminds me of. So Jack says, look, Joey, I appreciate your attempt to bond with me in my new identity, but I'm not going to check out guys with you. And Joey says, why not? There's nothing sexual about it. It's a certificate, idiotic, ridiculous, fun way to spend the lunch hour. And Jack says, are you okay? And Joey says, I'm bored with this school, with work, with this town, also with myself. I mean, this is the most amusement I had in weeks. And Jack laughs, and Joey looks back at the lunch line, and Joey says, which I agree with Joey, I'm so bored, and I would probably do this too. And Joey says, convicted, too pretty, ooh, definitely Frankenstein, ooh, Leo as in DiCaprio. And Jack laughs and says, how bizarre is this? The other week we were dating, and now, and Joey says, I know, it's a little strange. Does it bother you? And Jack says, actually, no. You? And Joey says, no, it doesn't bother me. Which, I like their friendship, and it really shows in the scene, because it wasn't like Jack and Joey weren't talking at all, like Dawson and Joey were. And again, I was saying how Jack is so different from Dawson, and this kind of proves my point, because I feel like Dawson would never do this. Obviously, there was like years and years of it, like Dawson and Joey, but I mean, it meant something to Joey that Jack was doing this for her. And it wasn't like Joey was trying to like hurt Jack in any type of way. Like, she was just trying to like move on. I feel like Joey's that type of person. Like, obviously she'll stick with the guy, but I feel like after a while she'll move on to the next guy. Which I don't think I could do. Like, I feel like one person, I just stick with them for a while, and I'm like, how do you move on so fast? And so with Joey, I feel like she was just like struggling with moving on, so that's why she was playing this game in the lunchroom, which is a normal teenage thing to probably do, but I was just kind of laughing about it because I'm like, okay, Joey, you do you. The next scene that we have is scene 1 of Pacey. So it cuts to Pacey and Andy walking down the docks, and Andy says, why not? And Pacey says, because last year a bunch of punk kids threw water balloons at me, and then the jocks knocked the booth over. And being considered with the threat of the death but the safety booth for Cape Side Police Department is not exactly my idea of rocking good. And so there's a fair or something coming up, and so Andy and Pacey are talking about it, and we'll see Andy get on the side. We're like, you should totally do that. And Pacey's like, why in the world would I do that? And I feel like in this episode, obviously with the dance that was like earlier in the season, I feel like Pacey's just that type of guy that like doesn't want to draw attention to himself. And this episode, it really proves it, even though he's done stuff to draw himself, like, attention to himself, but I feel like that wasn't on purpose. And we'll see in this episode that's basically what it's like. And Andy says, I looked up to my safety mascot when I was a kid. And Pacey's like, and you wonder why they call you Andy the Geek on the playground. And Andy says, okay, you're not supposed to repeat that. I love how, like, Pacey always repeats her secrets. And Andy's like, why would you say that? And Pacey laughs by saying, listen, a stuffed animal named Skifty, the safety dog, is not going to de-stress kids from doing drugs. And Annie says, no, Captain Skifty sends a positive message, and it's completely worthwhile. And Pacey says this is a Democrat. If a two-year-old child doesn't want to sit in a safety seat, he shouldn't have to. Which, obviously, I think Pacey's point of view as a 16-year-old might have changed later in life, but I find this kind of funny because I'm like, this is funny because I wonder how, like, later in life how Pacey would react to his kid sitting in a safety seat. And Andy says, Pacey. And Pacey says, okay, that was a bad example, but you know what I mean. And Andy says, look, there's supposed to be a fortune teller at the fair, and I really want to know my fortune. And Pacey says, Andy, what is this with you and all this mumble-jumble crystal crap? It's a scam, alright? And I believe that fortune tellers, like some fortune tellers, might tell the truth. And I don't want anyone to take this, like, offensively or anything. However, there was this fortune teller that once, if you ever heard of the three Cleveland girls, there was Amanda Berry, Michelle Knight, and Gina, I can never pronounce her last name. Anyway, so Amanda Berry's mom died of cancer a long time ago. But before she died of cancer, there was this lady who had a fortune teller, and she was telling where her daughter was, and she was like, your daughter's dead. And the mom was heartbroken by this, believing that because she told her fortune, she told what actually happened, she knew that. And I feel like this is more like a psychic thing. I believe that fortune tellers are based off of psychics. And so the mom was completely heartbroken by this, and Amanda Berry was actually alive the whole time. And her mom died not knowing that her daughter was actually alive. And it was 10 years of being kidnapped, raped, and all this different kind of stuff. And she had a daughter. So her mom could have had, like, seen her granddaughter and her. But sadly, her mom died of cancer, not knowing where her daughter was at all. So Andy says, okay, if you do the Captain Skifty booth, then we can, and she whispers something probably dirty in Pacey's ear. And Pacey smiles, and Pacey said, unlike that deep voice, hello, boys and girls, this is your friend Captain Skifty here. Which, I love how Andy can just convince him just like that. Like, if you do this, we can do this. And Pacey's like, heck yeah, we'll do that. So the next scene that we have is scene 3 of Joey. So it cuts to the winter fair. So they're at a fair. And Jack is messing with pictures on the art exhibit, and him and Joey are putting up. And Jack says, so tell me, Miss Potter, are these your life connection from your early works? And Joey in a daze says, and he goes, Joey? And Joey snaps out of it. And Jack says, where were you? And then Joey says, none of your business. And Jack says, I see, lost in X-ray thought. And Joey says, no. And Jack says, come on, tell me. And Joey says, okay, promise you won't laugh. And Jack does a cheesy 5-year-old thing where he crosses his chest like he's promising. And Joey says, I was thinking about kisses. And Jack laughs, and Joey says, forget it. And Jack says, no, I'm sorry. It just sounds funny coming from the girl who decided to throw her relationships in pursuit of her true self. And I feel like Joey did say she didn't want to be in a relationship, because I feel like in her heart she knew that Dawson wasn't the right person for her to be in a relationship with, and Jack obviously wasn't the person to be in a relationship with. And I feel like it was different later in season 3. Obviously, we all know what happens where Joey decides to be with Pacey. And I feel like the one reason why is because she knew in her heart it was all worth it, and that's why she did it. And so I feel like now it's like, who is Joey gonna end up with? Is she gonna end up with Dawson? Is she gonna end up with someone new? Or is she gonna end up with someone that's already there? And I feel like right now we can see how Joey is feeling about everything, and how she feels like it's not worth it to be in a relationship. And I feel like that's one of the reasons, because she knew in her heart it wasn't worth it. So Joey says, I know. I mean, sometimes I'm sorry I ever said that. I mean, I'm being honest with you to the point of utter humiliation. I missed the kissing part, and I think that I'll kiss again before the millennial comes and goes. And I love how Joey says that, because obviously, it happens next season, and obviously Dawson and Joey end up together in order for Pacey and Joey to end up together, because Dawson later kisses her, and that's a big thing that we're going to go into later. But Jack says it will happen, and Dawson comes up and he says what will happen, and Joey says nothing, and Dawson says, okay, well, I guess I'll see you later. And Jack says, no, why don't you stick around to help us? And Joey says, yeah, stay. And Dawson says, nah, I'm helping Miss Kenny with the sound and film exhibit. So I just want to say that if you haven't already watched this episode fully, Miss Kenny was actually from Gilmore Girls, and she's actually from Riverdale too. I was like, where is she from? But she's Sharon in Gilmore Girls, and she's Betty's, I think her name's Betty. Becky's mom from Riverdale. I haven't watched Riverdale in so long. So I'm like, oh, she's from a lot of shows, and she's Miss Kenny in this. So Dawson walks up, and Jack says, so, Frank Leo? And that's what popped up, because earlier she said Frank and Leo, and that was Dawson. And Joey says, Dawson's definitely a Leo, which I agree. Leo DiCaprio. Leo as in DiCaprio, that's what she says earlier. And Jack says, Dawson seems a little moody lately because he had a dream about you too. And Joey says, I know, I can always tell when there's something wrong with him, but it doesn't seem like he wants my help right now. I can't get my friendship back in track, and I miss him. And Jack says, give it time, I'm sure he'll want you back in his life, trust me. In the meantime, why don't you figure out when the exclusive next kiss is, and go and define your lips to yours. And Joey says, what? And he points to the tent where the fortune teller was, that earlier Pacey said was stupid, but Jack was like, you should do it. But I think there is a difference. When I was making that, telling you guys that story about Amanda Berry, I feel like there was a difference between sidekicks and fortune tellers, but it was still worth the story, The next scene that we have is scene 2 of Pacey. So it cuts to Pacey with the safety puppet on his hand talking to Andy, and Pacey in a gruff voice says, and remember, kids, if you have sex, protect yourself. Do it when you can't get caught, And Andy says, okay, come on. Why don't you want your fortune told? And Pacey says, because I don't want to go there. Have a lady take one look at me and predict Ozma's death and destruction on the global level, and I kind of wish that Pacey did get his fortune told, because I feel like it would have been kind of cool to see what it was. And he says, the end of the world as we know it. And Andy says, I thought you didn't believe in them. And Pacey says, I don't. I suggest the power of suggestion is a dangerous thing. And Andy says, but but if you don't know, if you knew what was coming up, if you knew what to expect, then at least you'll be prepared for it, which that's just anxiety talking completely. And Pacey says, I think that you should save your money, Blondie. That's the all-powerful Pacey Deneen will protect your future. I see a tall, dark, handsome man who is occasionally brilliant and often certificate coming into your life and sweeping you off your feet. So there is a line, and we're going to go over this later, where it says a tall, dark, handsome man. Anyone recognize that phrase? Anyone? I can't think of it. Oh yeah, Joey, where they were like, there's a tall, handsome man in your future, which obviously we'll see later what that fortune really meant. But in my opinion, I think it meant that Pacey was referring to himself, and then later the fortune teller probably referred to him too. And Annie says, well, good. Then I have something to look forward to. And Pacey says, funny, very funny. Have I told you how funny you are? Which, I love that. I love how Pacey refers to himself as the tall, handsome man. Wink, wink. So the next scene that we have is scene 4 of Joey. And it cuts to Macron, I don't know. I'm just going to call her a fortune teller because I don't know how to pronounce her name. And Joey and Jack are in a dark tent. And the fortune teller says $5. And she blows smoke in Jack's face, and he slightly coughs, and Joey looks uncomfortable as she gets her money and hands it to the fortune teller. And the fortune teller says, I see a C. Do you know a Carrie? And Joey shakes her head no. And the fortune teller says, Clara, Connie, Corey, Cassie, Caroline. And Joey says, I know a Carol, but I haven't seen her since kindergarten. And the fortune teller says, she's telling me that you borrowed something of yours. Does that mean anything to you? And Joey says, I don't know, she might have borrowed a pencil or something. And the fortune teller says, yes, she has your pencil. And Joey looks disappointed, and just then a breeze came through the tent, and wind chimes made a noise. And the fortune teller says, there's much pain in your past, too much loss for one so young. You put up walls to protect yourself from harm, but you're doing it because you cut off yourself from new opportunities, new adventures. You may say yes to every opportunity that comes your way. So, in my opinion, I think that obviously this went to Dawson and Joey in a little bit of ways, because Dawson and Joey were like together and all this other kind of stuff later in the season. However, I do feel like this goes with Pacey too, because if she didn't say yes to Dawson, then there would be no Pacey and Joey. And I feel like because of that, Joey and Pacey, like, she had to say yes to every opportunity, and Pacey was her opportunity. And I feel like that's kind of what it meant. And the fortune teller says new opportunities, new adventures, and I feel like that was her opportunity, that was her adventure. And maybe this was also her accepting her dad. And Joey says, so what about my future? And the fortune teller says, what do you want to know? She says that. She's like, what do you want to know? And Joey says, what's going to happen? And the fortune teller says, you'll come to a fork in the road. You'll have to choose which path to take. Which again, I feel like this was Pacey. And Joey asks, how will I know what to choose? And the fortune teller says, you will be safe if you follow your heart. Which again, she followed her heart in season 3. And Joe says, anything else? A tall, dark man will come into your life. Am I wrong or am I wrong when I say that is what... Okay, so I feel like that's 2 dark, handsome mans, because Pacey comes in about 8, 9, 10, 11, 12... So about 6 episodes, we're going to talk about Pacey and Joey in season 3. But I feel like with this, she has to win, and the fortune teller says soon. However, I feel like there was 2 ways that you guys could view this. One, you could view it as her dad, like, oh, she's obviously talking about Joey's dad because Joey's dad comes up at the end of this episode. However, I feel like there's also another side where I'm like, but it could also mean Pacey, because Pacey later comes in her life, and it was like, oh, there was that too, obviously. And when she says, will come into your life, that could be two dark, handsome men. So maybe that's what she saw, or maybe not. But I do feel like this whole fortune had to do something with Pacey, Dawson, and Joey's dad. There was like 3 things that are coming in this. And the fork in the road obviously meant that like Dawson and Pacey, there was going to be some fork in the road between it, her and Joey, which I've been trying to figure out why they call it a triangle. I mean, because like obviously there's a love triangle in this, and I've been so confused. I was thinking about this, like, you know how like when you're walking somewhere and you just have random thoughts? I was like, why do they call it a triangle? And I feel really stupid because I'm like, when there's a triangle, there's one side, and then there's another side, and then there's 2 sides connecting that one. How is that a triangle? And obviously I know the answer now, but I'm just like so confused about this. And just random thoughts with me. But I like how when they said there's a fork in the road, really there's a love triangle in the road coming up. The next scene that we have is scene 5 of Joey. And it cuts to Jack and Joey walking towards the art exhibit. And Joey says, $5 to tell me a tall, dark stranger was coming into my life. And Jack says, and hopefully he's a Leo, not a Frank, right? And Joey says, I can't believe I spent $5 of my hard, and I mean hard-earned cash to hear that. And Joey's thoughts when a tall, dark man, which, when we go back, Pacey does say, like, tall, dark, handsome man. But now, like, she says tall man, but I still feel like it connects. He's looking at her paint exhibits, which I want to say that in the fanfiction, The Man to Hold, she made where Pacey bought one of her art, like, paintings, and she didn't tell, he told Jack not to tell anyone. So I just feel like this came from that scene, from this scene that's coming up, and from later when Dawson comes over. And this guy named Colin, who's the dark handsome man, says, excuse me, are these yours? And Jack looks at Joey and she tries to talk but nods. And Colin says, they're quite good. Hi, I'm Colin Macazard. And Joey says, hi. And Colin looks at Jack and back at Joey and says, well, good work. And Colin walks off and Jack hits Joey painfully on the arm and says, let me get this straight. Your destiny walks up to you, introduces himself, and you send him packing? You really turn on the Ice Queen comments when you want. And Joey says, what? Jack, I'm not looking for a boyfriend. Anyway, I'm looking for myself, my future. And Jack says, maybe he's a sign to the premarital, no string, no commitment kiss. Come on, the guy has experience. I mean, take a chance, have an adventure. And Joey says that's what the fortune said to do, to say yes to every opportunity that crosses my path. And Jack says, and throw conscience to the wind. Come on, go talk to him. Which I feel like when she says that, she's just realizing that this is a very non-Joey thing to do, was to open up to people. And I feel like that was where she took her fortune, was like, oh, okay, I'll say yes to every opportunity. But not because she told me, but because it seems right. I feel like that's how Joey took it. So the next scene that we have is scene 6 of Joey. And this is a short scene where it cuts to Joey looking at photographs on an exhibit, and she turns the corner where Colin is. And Joey says, you know, your work is quite remarkable. And Colin says, thank you. And Joey says, Joey Potter. And Colin says, can I buy you a cup of hot chocolate, Joey Potter? And Joey says, that would be lovely, thank you. And Colin says, oh, cool, let's go. So this was a short scene, but it's just proving that Joey said yes to an opportunity. The next scene that we have is scene 7 of Joey, where it cuts to Joey walking with Colin, and Joey says something that we have not heard before. And Joey says, "My mother was an artist, and one of my first memories of my life was covered in paint with this cynical look on her face. But I recently just began taking lessons." And Colin asks if she wants to sit, and Joey agrees. And Colin says, "Look, please don't take this the wrong way, but you are aware how unbelievably beautiful you are." And which, me personally, who has watched so many kidnap and murder shows and listen to a bunch of podcasts about it, I would just run. Oh yeah, peace. I say that, but I literally have met someone online. Anyway, and Joey says, "You know, you are an incredible photographer. When did you start taking photos?" And Colin says, "I don't know. I can't remember. I've always been fascinated with faces, how differently they appear in certain lights, and I made a discovery that there are a few faces that include a million different emotions at once, that you can stare at for hours like a work of art." And Joey says, "You're a freshman at the art institution?" And Colin says, "You, Joey, have unbelievable center lips. Kind of like Colin Wagmore." And Joey laughs, and Colin says, "Look, this may be out of the line, but you don't think that there's any way I could... Do you think there's any possible way that I could?" And Joey says, "Yes." And he says, "Photograph you." And Joey's completely disappointed that she said yes, because she thought that he was going to offer to kiss her, which is kind of weird. Why don't he just go for it? And Joey says, "Sure." Which, I feel bad for Joey, because obviously that's not what she expected at all. Next scene that we have is scene 3 of Pacey. So it cuts to Pacey in a police outfit and a huge doghouse with Skippy puppet on his hand, and the other hand there's covering up for Skippy to talk. And Pacey says in a rough voice, "Remember, kids, Captain Skippy says never talk to strangers, always wear your safety belt, and memorize your address and phone number." And a kid says, "Captain Skippy, you're a great big smelly jerk." And Pacey says one of my favorite things, where he goes, "I know you are, but what am I?" And the kid says, "I know you are, but what am I?" And then Pacey says, "I know you are, but what am I?" And then he caught himself and says, "And now Skippy takes a great big nap. Bye-bye." Pacey just cracks me up the whole entire time. And then we see Andy walking out of the fortune teller, and Pacey says, in a Skippy voice, he says, "Hey Andy, you won't believe it." And he knows that she's upset, and he says, "Hey, what happened? What's wrong?" And Andy says, "Nothing, I'm fine. I'm going for a walk." And she walks, and Pacey stares after her. Which I feel when Pacey does this, it's one of those things where it's really him caring, but I just love how he is with kids. "I know you are, but what am I?" And that whole scene just makes me laugh, but there's nothing else to talk about. I just love how Pacey's just doing this for kids, or for his dad. But anyway. So then we have the next scene, scene 8 of Joey, and it cuts to Joey gonna sit down by Jack at a picnic table, and Jack asks what happened, and Joey says he wants to take my picture for his photo collection. He's a freshman at the art exhibit, and Jack asks where, and Joey says community art buildings. I guess there's some costumes and stuff backstage. And Jack says, "What do you even know about this guy?" And Joey says, "Nothing, and I don't want to know anything about him. I just want to know if he has a girlfriend or a foot fetish." She says, "I don't want to know if he has a girlfriend or a foot fetish or a rap sheet." And he doesn't know anything about Joey Potter. Wait, exploration. He's an artist. He's different. He's quite experienced, and maybe I'll learn something from him. And Jack says, "What? The art of French kissing?" And Joey says, it's not about that, Jack. It's about expanding my horizon. I'm having an adventure. I'm having fun. And Jack, being the protective friend that he is, says, and I'm coming with you. And Joey says, Jack, and Jack says, there's no argument. This guy could be a tall, dark sociopath, which I like how he says that, because there are people, and like when they're murdering like someone, they do like say like, hey, come take a photo with me or something. They end up taking photos of them being killed. And so that's probably what went through like Jack's mind. Then we have scene 9 of Joey, and it cuts to Joey looking unhappy while the camera flashes, because she's not into that kind of stuff. And Joey says, I feel like a drag queen. And Jack says, you look great. And Colin says, alright, listen up, Joey. Now you give me a little bit of attitude. And Joey is moving like a big feather bow like around her face and making different faces. And Jack says, yes. And Colin says, yes, excellent. Alright, here Madame striding herself on the stage. And Joey puts the scarf over her shoulder and smiles, and Colin's like, good, keep it up. Alright, Madame sing happy birthday to JFK. And Joey turns and looks over his shoulder, and we can tell that she's completely confident, and I just love this whole scene. And Colin says, excellent, yes. And Jack gets in and says, you're the ghost of Catherine, and you're waiting for Heathcliff at the end of Wilder Heights. And Colin's like, good one. Jack says, thanks. And Colin says, God, she's beautiful. Are you two just friends? And Jack says, yeah, just friends. And Colin says, good, excellent. Joey, give me one more of those. And obviously, we don't know what happens with Jack and Colin later, but we do now. And I love how confident Joey is throughout the whole scene. So then we see the next scene, scene 10 of Joey. And it cuts to Joey in a new outfit, like a leopard coat. And I love this one. And this is actually the one that I drew for this episode. And Colin says, that's it, Joey. And she's sitting on the edge of the chair. And Colin says, now, come down. And she slides down to where she's sitting sideways in a chair, which I feel like I can make a bunch of edits based off this one. And it cuts to Joey in a new outfit, and she's in suspenders with a dress, a shirt underneath it, and a hat on it. And I love this one. And the first one, she has a rose in her mouth between her teeth, which that one's my favorite. And then she has one picture where she's when she takes one with her suspenders. And Colin says, that's it, Joey, that's it, you're fabulous. I cannot wait to get these developed. Which I love how they said developed. It just makes me laugh. And they hug, and Joey says, thank you. And as they're hugging, Joey gives Jack a thumbs up, and they stop. And Colin says, you are one diva. And they're standing there for a minute, and obviously Joey's waiting for a kiss, but Colin just walks off, disappointing Joey completely, which I feel bad for Joey in this scene, because she's like, oh, he's gonna kiss me. Doesn't kiss her. So the next scene we have is scene 4 of Pacey. So it cuts to Pacey at the winter fair, and he walks up to the table where Madame Soubray, aka the fortune teller, and the fortune teller says, you come to see me, young man, and you get your fortune only for $5. And Pacey said, just curious, when someone comes up to you to get their fortune told, why don't you say something nice, something reassuring, because I grant you that's what they want to hear. And the fortune teller says, then it wouldn't be the truth. If one asks for the truth, then they must hear. And Pacey says, well, I'm not asking. And the fortune teller says, well, I can tell you anyway. I see a young man who wears a mask that is not his own. To the world he is strong and confident, but underneath is a little boy, afraid of the world, afraid of everything, and he knows that everything has him lying on a deck of cards. Even the tiniest gust of wind can knock it all down, which I feel like is honestly the perfect fortune for Pacey, because he's always so scared of everything. There's so many times where I'm like, Pacey, why don't you just do it? And that's why, because he's just scared. and he's just strong and confident, like that scene where we see Mr. Peterson and Jack and Pacey. Like, he was so confident in that scene, but really he was struggling on the inside. And she says, beneath the mask of the little boy, I feel like that's where it comes with his dad. Afraid of the world, afraid of everything. He's just afraid that everything's gonna crash down. That's basically what she's saying. And he knows that everything has been lying on a deck of cards. Even the tiniest gust of wind could knock it all down. Like, I feel like that will just go with Andy, and I believe, like, not the next episode, but episode 20, that'll come up. And then later in the next season with Dawson, Joey, and Pacey. And Pacey obviously gets up and walks away because he doesn't want to know his fortune, and this lady just told him. The next scene that we have is scene 11 of Joey. So it cuts to Joey leaving, and she's walking by Colin, and Colin says, there's something I want to... Nah, forget it, it's nothing. And Joey says, what? And Colin says, there's something that I want to, and Joey says, yes. And Colin asks if Jack is dating anyone, and she just leaves, and it goes to Joey and Jack at the art exhibit, and Jack asks what happened, and Joey says, well, he would have probably thrown it on the ground and make me a passionate love to me if, and Jack says, if, and Joey says, if he wasn't gay. And Jack says, what? And Joey says, he compared me to Madame and Marie Mona talking about your red flags. And Jack's like, what? And Joey says, he's gay, as in $3 bill. And Jack says, you're kidding me. And Joey says, no. And Jack, you really need to develop some gay art. And Jack says, yeah. And I hear they're making a training class on that in the community center. Like, oh, okay. Joey, that was rude, first of all. And Jack, good comeback. And Jack says, and Joey says, I'm sorry, I'm new at this. And Jack says, you? What about me? People look at me like I'm starting to tap dance to Betty Maru's album. And Joey says, well, there should be cheer you up. It's time to turn a dark stranger coming in your life. And Jack says, what? And Joey says, you wanted to meet after the fair, so I told him you would meet him at the fire at 11. And Jack's like, you, what? Why? And Joey says, because he's nice, he's smart, attractive. What's your problem? Go out with him. And Jack says, look, because there's a second homosexual in Cape Side, it doesn't mean I'm obligated to go out with him, Joey. Which I do feel like Joey did set like a bunch of boundaries. She didn't even ask, she just kind of did it. But I feel like Jack did need a friend like that. However, Joey did mess up on that. So the next scene that we have is scene 12 of Joey, and it cuts to Jack sitting down by Joey and handing her a cup of coffee, and Joey says thanks, and Jack says, I'm sorry, Joey, I have overreacted. I know that I should be moving on with this whole sexual identity, but the truth is, I am not ready, not yet. And Joey says, well, we got a whole lifetime adventure ahead of us, right? Plenty of times for romance. And Jack kisses her on the forehead, and Jack says, plenty of time to be kissed. Come here. And they snuggle up, which I found that like a really good friendship right there. And then Dawson sees this, and he like walks away. So that was a little bit important, but not really at the same time. So the next scene that we have is scene 5 of Pacey, and it goes to him sitting with Andy by the fire, and Pacey says, alright, Andy, tell me what happened. And Andy says, I just want to know things that were going to get better, but they're not. She said that there's trouble in my past and only previews of what's going to come. I know that the worst is behind me, Pacey, because I don't know if I can take any more unhappiness. Pacey says, Andy, how could you take the word of a $5 candidate seriously? Your future is going to be so bright and so modified that it's going to be off the scale. There's no measure for how wonderful your life is going to turn out. And Andy says, I wish I could believe that. And Pacey says, you don't have to. I'll believe it for you. And he kisses her hand, and they sit by the fire. I love this scene because it just shows how supportive Pacey is with all his girlfriends basically. But it really shows how Andy will be scared, but Pacey will be right by him, right by her. And I feel like that's like the perfect scene for Pacey and Andy, because it just shows how warm and amazing how Pacey is. So the next scene that we have is scene 13 of Joey, which it goes to the campfire, which I'm surprised that Andy and Pacey didn't, and Joey didn't run into each other. And Joey says, "Hey Colin, I'm sorry, but Jack isn't coming." And he goes, "It's alright." And Joey says, "Are you okay?" And Colin says, "What, with this?" "Yeah." And Joey says, "Are you sure?" And Colin says, "Actually, I'm only probably unworried about. I just broke up with someone, and we're friends for a long time. But now I don't have a relationship or a friend. I guess I was trying to fill a void." And Joey says, "Can I ask you something?" And Colin says, "Yeah." And she says, "Why did you two break up?" And Colin says, "At the time, I could think about a million reasons, but now I can only think of any. Does that make sense?" And Joey says, "Yeah, it makes more sense than you could imagine." And Colin says, "Sometimes I wish I wasn't in a big hurry to move forward. There comes a point when it's impossible to go back." And he kisses her on the cheek and he says goodnight. And I feel like this kind of like makes Joey think about Dawson, which is good and bad at the same time, because there's just so much going on with Joey and Dawson, and she's like, "I understand what he means because I feel the same way." And I feel like that's where the scene went with Joey. So the next scene that we have is a side note. It doesn't have to do with anything with it does have to do something with Joey, but it doesn't have to do anything with Pacey, and it's not really a scene of both of them. So here we go. So it cuts to Dawson getting his fortune told, and obviously it's $5, and Dawson says, "But you're closed." And anyway, so she sits there and she goes, "The lovers, very interesting. A soulmate walks into your path, one you have known for many times before this. She knows you well, she sees your soul, she feels your pain." And Dawson says, "She blew me off." And the fortune teller says, "No, she's here, she's around you." And Dawson says, "Then why do I keep losing her?" And the fortune teller says, "That which is lost and cannot be found again." And Dawson looks at the sky and reaches for a wallet and says thanks. And that's when he walks away. So the reason why I wanted to point out this scene was because I feel like everyone was telling Dawson that they were soulmates, and this is one of the scenes. And I feel like this kind of started around now, where it was they weren't really soulmates, but everyone was kind of saying, Gail was saying it, the fortune teller was saying it, Jen said it one time. And I feel like because of that, Dawson really thought about that, and it just continued throughout the whole show. And I feel like he was very possessive of Joey, and I feel like this is one of the things that made him more possessive. So the last scene that we have is scene 14 of Joey, and it cuts to Joey staring at Dawson's house through the window, but she doesn't see Dawson, and obviously Dawson's staring back at her, trying to call at home. And it cuts to Joey turning from Dawson's house and rowing her boat to the house. And it cuts to Dawson sitting at the window and clutching his knees, which, okay. And it cuts to Joey going to her house, and there's a man standing at the door. And Joey says, "Who's there?" And the man turns around, and it's Mr. Potter. She goes, "Daddy?" And then it ends right there. I remember the first time I watched this, I went, like that, because I'm like, no way. And I remember cutting back in this scene, there's no way that Mr. Potter is back, but he was. And I feel like that was one of my favorite scenes. So with this episode, what we learned was obviously Joey's dad came back, and we learned that that's the tall, dark man. But I feel like later in the season, season 3, I was like, I don't feel like Mr. Potter was that dark man. I feel like Pacey was. And she took the opportunities that came her way, obviously. But with Pacey, I feel like it was just her, the fortune teller, and him not to be scared of anything, which I feel like would come back later in the scenes with Andy in the next episode. So there was a lot of things that basically went on, but I feel like this was more of a Joey episode than a Pacey episode, which was good in a lot of ways, because I feel like with Pacey, he learns a lot of things, but I feel like another way he kind of doesn't, if you know what I mean. Like, we learned that Pacey is good with kids, and a little bit, and we learned that Dawson has, like, is Joey's soulmate, and it goes with that, and I put air quotes with that too. And with Joey, we learned that Joey's trying to move on from Jack, and Jack is just standing there like, I'm not ready for today, I'm not ready for that. And obviously there was a lot of things that goes on in this episode with Andy and Dawson and Joey, and I feel like with all that, it just goes back to Pacey. Like, he doesn't have that many scenes in this episode, but I feel like we just learned that Andy and Pacey, like, no matter what, Pacey was always going to be there for her, and I feel like that will cut with the next, not next episode, but the next 2 episodes after that, where Andy has a meltdown, and everything happens with her anxiety, which we will go into, and I feel like the next episode will really go back to like Joey's fortune, which the next episode is based off the wedding, and we'll see more of Joey's dad in that episode. So, if you like this episode, please make sure to give it a big thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel, where I will be hosting every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Make sure to follow my Instagram, Witter and Potter, and my TikTok, Pacey and Joey. And I'll catch you next time. Bye, guys!